Good afternoon, everyone. So good to see you. Someday soon, I can see it on the horizon. We will be together in person, and I can't wait. But so happy you're joining us virtually tonight. I'm Shane Murphy Goldsmith. I'm president and CEO of Liberty Hill Foundation. And I know we have some new folks today, which is always so wonderful. I wish we could all embrace you new folks in person and give you a sense of the very special love that the Liberty Hill community has for new folks and longtime folks alike. But I will, instead of that, I will tell you a little bit about Liberty Hill Foundation, which is we've been around for about 45 years, and we work with folks in communities that are facing systemic oppression to make sure they have the resources they need to fight David and Goliath battles and win a lot of the time. And even when we lose, we keep holding power for the next fight. And so we provide grants and training and coalition support and all kinds of love to organizers on the front lines of fights around economic justice, LGBTQ justice, racial justice, environmental justice, and really trust their leadership and give them all the support we can so they can lead the way. And I'm really so happy about our topic tonight around housing justice. This obviously is a massive crisis here in Los Angeles. An economic crisis, a racial crisis existed before the pandemic and is come into view in new ways because of the pandemic. And I'll say that just to share a little personal background about me, when I was growing up, my family became quite poor when my dad became a single dad after my mom died, and we rented an apartment in Santa Monica, and there's absolutely no way that we could have kept that apartment on the fixed income that my family lived off of if it weren't for rent control. And I recently learned that Liberty Hill funded the fight for rent control in Santa Monica. So I like to think that Liberty Hill saved me from homelessness when I was a kid, long before I'd ever heard Liberty Hill's name. And when I grew up, when I was about 19, my dad passed away, and my brother and I had no money and no parents, and the landlord came to us and said, "Your dad's gone, so you got to move out by the end of the month." And so we had a couple weeks to pack up our things and go. And of course, I had no idea at the time that there was such a thing as rent control, or that that my family did have rights. And I think about the heroes that are leading Stay Housed and the Right to Counsel campaign, which you'll hear about today. And I'm so grateful to all of them on behalf of the 19-year-old version of me and the many folks across Los Angeles who have no idea that they have rights and have no idea that folks are out there protecting them. And these programs and these organizers bring that information directly to tenants and make sure they know their rights and make sure they have the support to fight for them when landlords do unscrupulous things. So I am personally so grateful to the organizers you're going to meet today and others that Liberty Hill works closely with. And I'm so glad that you get to hear from them. And the stories that I've heard from them are quite shocking. And there's a certain amount of coverage in the news, but really the public does not understand what's happening out there on the ground. And so I think more people need to know, and I'm glad to have folks here to share that with you. So I will turn it over to Jenny, our amazing and brilliant Executive Vice President, to lead our conversation.
All right, thank you, Shane. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We actually have a very special guest, Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, who will be providing a few remarks. Before we go into her remarks, I do want to just provide a brief overview of today's event. We're going to hear from Supervisor Kuehl. Then we will engage in a little bit of trivia, not too much, but just to get our creative juices flowing. We'll hear about the Stay Housed LA County program that Liberty Hill Foundation and our community partners are spearheading to keep people housed and prevent homelessness. And then we're going to open it up to a conversation amongst all of you. And we will wrap that all up within an hour's time. So just to give a snapshot of the Stay Housed LA program, we are with 20 plus organizations across the county, getting the word out about a variety of protections for tenants, including rental assistance, which you may have heard about this week, but all the tenants' rights that have been passed recently from all the campaigns that you may have been tracking and heard about or participated in. And we're also providing free legal assistance. So that's the general nuts and bolts of the program. We're going to hear some brief remarks from Supervisor Kuehl, our champion for housing justice first, and then we'll dive a little bit further into the program. Supervisor Kuehl, you're up.
Hi, I'm LA County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl and a proud former Liberty Hill board member. And I'm really excited and grateful to be here with you today because Liberty Hill has been a really invaluable partner with LA County this past year as we've tried to prevent more people from falling into homelessness. Of course, this is not the first time and hopefully not the last time. Liberty Hill has played an invaluable role in progressive work moving forward at the county. Liberty Hill helped mobilize people in support of our rent stabilization law, win the raise in the minimum wage, and help us reimagine youth justice. Just months into the COVID-19 pandemic, hundreds of thousands of county residents were struggling to figure out how they were going to pay rent. How were they going to avoid homelessness? And the county passed an eviction moratorium. But what good is a law if the people who need it don't know about it? And that's where Liberty Hill came in. Through Liberty Hill, the county was able to fund grassroots organizations in the neighborhoods most at risk and educate tenants about their rights and provide legal counsel when necessary. I don't know any other way the county could have effectively reached those thousands upon thousands of families, especially after 4 years of our last president, who helped cement the idea that if you were an immigrant or undocumented, the government was not to be trusted. How convenient that the government then would only work for the other guys. So thank you, Liberty Hill, for the unique role that you play and have played all along in driving progressive policy change in LA County. And then once policies are passed, taking the extra step to make sure that those new policies actually get effectively implemented. I'm very grateful. I'm really proud that you're here in LA County. Keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you, Supervisor Kuehl. Thank you for your steadfast leadership and for being a champion of housing justice and tenants' rights. I want to share a little bit about the context of the Stay Housed LA program and really all of Liberty Hill's housing justice work, where we focus on empowering tenants to fight for their rights and then support one another in community. As you know, Los Angeles has a major homelessness crisis. And in fact, first-time homelessness is really outpacing our ability to house people and outpacing our progress to get folks housed and solve homelessness. In fact, this last year, we were able to house over 20,000 people with measures H and HHH. We're housing more people than ever. However, 53,000 plus individuals moved into homelessness and are now living on the streets. That's 2.5 times the amount of people that we're able to house are actually going into homelessness. So at that rate, there's really no way that we're going to be able to solve homelessness. Liberty Hill's focus is on preventing folks from going into homelessness, preventing folks from losing their homes, and keeping people housed. As you can see by this slide, about 2/3 of the individuals who are entering homelessness are experiencing houselessness for the first time. The majority of those are because of economic woes. They're not able to pay their rent. They may have lost their job due to COVID. They may have a variety of other economic circumstances. So for us, it's about providing supports so that tenants, as much of the circumstances that they may be challenged with during COVID, that they're able to leverage those new tenant protections that we've passed at the county, the state, and the city level, and even nationally. But without understanding those rights, there's no way that they can exercise them, and more people are falling into homelessness. Before we get into the details of the Stay Housed LA program, we wanted to do a little bit of trivia to get our juices flowing so that we can understand the context of the problem. We can go to the next slide. So we have a question for you all. You're welcome to put your answers in the chat or shout them out. So we know that approximately 12% of homeowners surveyed in Los Angeles very recently reported serious problems paying for housing during the pandemic. What percentage of renters in Los Angeles reported serious problems paying for their housing during the same period? So 12% of homeowners, what percent of renters do you think are experiencing serious challenges paying for their housing? Shout it out.
50?
50. I see a guess from Candy, 60%. Allison's also saying 60.
50.
60.
I'm hearing a lot of 50 and 60, and the answer is 50%. So that's right. Far more renters are experiencing serious problems paying for their housing during the pandemic. So we know that we have to focus on those that are most vulnerable and focus on those that are having the greatest hardship. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Let's do another question. Over 90% of landlords are represented by an attorney when going to court for an eviction. What percentage of tenants facing eviction have legal representation? Feel free to take yourself off mute, put it in the chat.
10%.
10%, good guess. I'm seeing another 10% from Pam. Other guesses?
5 to 10.
5 to 10. And the answer is 10%. Awesome job, everybody. That is correct. So 90% of landlords compared to 10% of tenants go to court facing an eviction with legal representation. That really is not an even playing field. And that's very much what we're fighting for greater legal representation for all tenants through a codified right to counsel. And that's what Stay Housed is doing, is providing additional legal counsel to tenants in need of that support. And we have one more question here. When tenants have access to legal representation, their chances of avoiding homelessness due to eviction increases by approximately 10%. So we're comparing tenants who go to court without legal representation and comparing their chances to the chances of those that go to court with legal representation and how many are able to avoid homelessness due to that additional representation. How much do their chances go up? 20%, 40%, 60%, or 70%? 60%. Seeing that guess from Derek, thank you. Other guesses? %. All right, the answer is 70%. So 70%, people have a 70% greater chance of avoiding homelessness when they have legal representation. And that's why we're fighting so hard to increase representation and outreach so that tenants not only know their rights, but are able to exercise them effectively. Next slide. So in summary, we see that 50% of renters report serious problems paying for housing during this pandemic, here in LA County in particular. 10% of tenants facing eviction have legal representation compared to 90% of landlords. And then we know that there is an increase of 70% of tenants being able to avoid homelessness with legal representation. Liberty Hill obviously is committed to racial justice, so we wanted to also share a couple of statistics in regards to race and ethnicity. We see right now that 77% of people who owe rent that are renters back rent for many months, over a year now of being in this pandemic. 77% of people who owe rent are people of color and earn less than $50,000 a year. So it's really going to be hard for those folks without additional support, without understanding their rights, without having legal representation to be able to stay in their homes and get through all the back debt that they may owe unless we provide them robust supports. Broken down by race, we see that the Latinx community makes up 57% of those who are owing back rent. And 38% are Black in LA County, 15% are white. So we know that this is a racial justice issue. Housing justice is a racial justice issue. And that's why we're so deeply committed to continuing to fight for tenants' rights, to continuing to fight for not only rental assistance, but ultimately some rental relief that truly solves this issue for low-income tenants in particular. So with that being said, that's the context in which this Stay Housed LA program is operating. And we're going to share a little bit more about the Stay Housed LA program with you now. If you want to go to the next slide. So we don't want to leave you in a doom and gloom statistic state. There's lots of numbers that we can share with you, lots of them on the slide. But we are doing something about it with your support. Liberty Hill Foundation and 20 plus community organizing groups, as well as legal service providers, have launched Stay Housed LA County. It's a one-stop shop for tenants to be able to sign up for Know Your Rights workshops, to be assigned free legal representation, and to join a community of tenants who are fighting the good fight for greater tenant protections, as well as staying in their homes as a collective. If you want to check out our website at any point, you're welcome to check it out at stayhousedla.org. And of course, that's our phone number if it's useful for you to share that. It's a hotline Monday through Friday that's available for all tenants who have a question about their rights or need some assistance in figuring out what to do next when they face a challenging circumstance with their landlord, or face tenant harassment, or don't know, do I need to pay my rent this month or not? I'm going to go ahead and introduce our Senior Program Manager for Housing Justice, Jessa McCormick, who is going to run us through some of the great overview of the Stay Housed LA County program.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you everyone for being here today. So like Jenny said, the goal of Stay Housed LA is to provide information and legal services to keep people in their homes. And we do this through three big categories of work. We have public awareness and outreach, education, also known as Know Your Rights workshops, and legal services. So if you are a visual person like me, it's really helpful to think of these three categories of work as a funnel, right? So the biggest and broadest part of Stay Housed LA is public awareness. We utilize digital ads on social media platforms, so things like Facebook and Instagram, as well as traditional media, to tell tenants all across the county that they have rights. Alongside our public awareness campaign, we also have over 14 community organizations conduct get out the vote style outreach. And that just means we have teams that call, text, and sometimes do safe, socially distant canvassing to tenants who live in places that are most vulnerable to eviction and displacement. And then slightly more targeted, we have our educational events that are co-hosted by community organizations and legal service providers to really review the most important rights that tenants need to know. This is a very complicated area of law, and it takes lawyers a long time to learn the ropes, right? So if you're a tenant and just need to know what you need to know, it takes a little bit. You need someone to walk you through it. And then lastly, we have legal services. We work with 10 legal service providers across the county to provide everything from counsel and advice all the way up to full scope legal services, which just means you actually go to court. And important to know, all of our legal services are free to all low income tenants in the county. So we can go to the next slide. Like I said, we have 14 community organizations and actually potentially more soon working on outreach and education. And one of the cool things, we've actually mapped out our outreach and education coverage. And by my best guess, we cover about 75% of the county with our outreach and education services, which for a place as big as LA is pretty amazing. So we can go to the next slide. And of course, we have our legal service providers. It's important to note that this is one of the first times legal service providers and community organizations have worked in a deeply coordinated way. So with Stay Housed LA, we're committed not only to changing outcomes for tenants, but we're helping all of our organizations work together more effectively. And lastly, of course, our strategic partners. So the primary funder for this work is the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. And of course, the reason we're all here today, Liberty Hill is a strategic partner in Stay Housed LA. We act mostly as a financial intermediary for outreach and education work. And we were asked to do this by our community partners so we can ease all the administrative burden of a county contract and to provide program management, because this is a big lift. It's never been done before. So Stay Housed LA started in August of 2020, and I'm going to run through some of our achievements of the past 7 months. The first that you can see here are outreach and education. So we've connected with over 200,000 tenants all across the county with phone calls and text messages. This is that targeted outreach done by our community organizations that I was talking about earlier. We've also hosted 262 Know Your Rights workshops, which have been attended by over 4,000 renters across the county. Next slide. Our public awareness campaign is up and running. We've had over 45 media placements. Some of these I'm sure you all know: KCRW, the LA Times, the New York Times, ABC7, LAist. We've also had over 12 million digital impressions, which means that people have seen our ads over 12 million times. One of the things we've learned in this time of being socially distant is how effective our digital ads can really be. Next. And lastly, our legal services. We've provided 9,000 tenants with limited legal counsel and advice, and we've represented over 700 tenants in court to help prevent eviction, which is, for operating for 7 months, it's a huge step. And lastly, I just wanted to share some of the things that we're actually seeing from Stay Housed LA. So this goes back to that outreach and education that I was talking about earlier, the over 200,000 people we've helped reach. That means we've had over 200,000 conversations with people all across the county. And our callers get kind of an up-close view of the trends that are happening to tenants in our county. And this is kind of what they're seeing. So the first, confusion. No one knows what rights are available and how long they're going to last. As I said, this is very complicated. The second, an increase in landlord harassment. So that can be anything from coming in without a notice to threatening to evict someone, all the way up to feeling unsafe in your own home. I've heard stories from our folks that some tenants feel so in danger by their landlord that they don't feel safe being in their home or leaving their home, and that's not okay. The third, increased legal and illegal lockouts. So this means that the sheriff comes, if it's a legal lockout, and actually changes the locks and forces the tenant to leave. We've also seen a huge increase in illegal lockouts, which means that the landlord is the one that is changing the locks and there's no law enforcement involved. And actually, just today, by my own tracking, there have been at least 3 lockouts in LA County that our partners are working to stop as we speak. This is a huge increase in lockouts. We are talking to one of our partners a couple of weeks ago who has said, we used to see 5 to 7 lockouts a year. Now we see 5 to 7 lockouts in just 1 week. So this is a huge thing that has happened during the pandemic. We also see more nuisance allegations. And again, we've been home for so long now. So we've had family members come with us. We have virtual distance learning, lots of people in our homes, which might mean increased noise. We've also had a huge jump in unemployment, which means that people might have to live together in order to actually make rent and have a place to live. And that can correlate to an increase in nuisance allegations. We also see a lot of rental assistance requests being ignored. So some landlords say, I actually don't want to accept your rental assistance. I want you to pay it yourself. And then we also see mail tampering, especially with notices from the court. And these are the documents that tell a tenant that they are being served a notice and need to show up in court. So that's just a little bit of what we're seeing. And I'm going to stop talking so we can get to the best part of our day today. I'm going to hand it back to Jenny so that we can start the panel with all of our guests.
Thank you, Jessa. Thank you so much for your work leading this program. And of course, thank you to all of our donors who have helped make this program possible and have really been fueling and providing the resources to get this type of coordination off the ground and actually into implementation. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a crew of folks, 3 amazing leaders who are making this program happen on the ground. and truly helping people stay housed every single day. Our first guest is Catalina Ramo. Catalina is the Stay Housed LA Outreach and Education Coordinator, and she represents SAGE, otherwise known as, but less frequently, Strategic Actions for a Just Economy. So welcome, Kata. We also have Derek Steele, Executive Director of the Social Justice Learning Institute and leader of Uplift Englewood, and Pamela Augustine, who is the lead organizer with the Eastside Leads Coalition. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you, thank you. So I'd love to just start with a quick question to Kata. We just saw this slide about all the trends. You are leading the efforts to reach out to 200,000 plus tenants across the county. Can you bring some of those words that were on the screen to life a little bit? What are the trends that you're hearing? And what do folks need to know that a lot of us on the line are not renters? We may be homeowners and other property owners. What do we need to know about what's happening on the ground right now?
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, I'd love to share. So definitely what was put on the screen is a lot of what we're hearing: increased harassment, definitely a lot of folks back on rent. And I think one thing that I would just like to highlight is that on accident, I have done a lot of phone banking throughout my life and career, usually fundraising, asking people for money, political asks, or education. So this one thing I really want to highlight is that what's unique about being on the phones for Stay Housed is that I hear something that I've never heard in any other phone banking experience, which is getting on the phone with people, a cold call, and hearing, you do the first part of your rap. Hi, we're Stay Housed. We're offering rental resources, educating you on your rights as a renter in Los Angeles. And on the other end of the line to hear, really, I'm so glad you called. I need this today. Thank you. Today's my last day. I didn't know there was anything like this. And I've never heard that kind of response when phone banking. So that shows that there's a really high need. So I don't want to hear that, but at the same time, I'm really happy that we're on the phones and that we're getting this resource out to people.
That's amazing. Thank you, Kata. So we're proactively calling folks on the front lines who may not, read the newspaper, may not know that, there are protections out there, and making sure that they are aware. We're calling zip codes of high rent burdened communities to making sure that folks are aware of the resources that they have available. Derek, what are you seeing in Englewood in terms of the trends on the ground? You could share a few highlights of what you're hearing from your community.
Well, I'm really concerned, to be honest, about what's happening on the ground now. And it's because the need was already great. It was already there before COVID. And then COVID came and it just really exacerbated the disparities that existed. And, here we are, all of our various organizations trying to do what we can to lock arms and stand in the gap. Really, it's not even a gap, it's a chasm, because it's just so large and the problem is getting bigger every single day. But the other side of it is seeing the resilience of people finding a way. Now, in Englewood, from the beginning when, a lot of the large changes that were happening in the city, from the stadiums and all of that was coming to bear, we knew that if there was nothing done, because at that time there was no rent stabilization, there were no renter protections and those types of things, and living in a city that has about 63% of folks who live there being renters, we could see that it was going to be problematic if nothing was done. And I kind of make this equal to like pulling teeth, right? The whole process that we did, it was like pulling teeth to get leadership to move. And when you're trying to pull a tooth out, it's probably because you waited for the last minute, that tooth is rotten and now you got to take it out. And that's kind of where we are. But even the solution that was brought to bear is only 5 years of rental support and renter protections, right? And so there's still a lot of work to do, but we've been able to support people and getting the information out through Stay Housed, but also as an organization with support from folks like Liberty Hill and so many of the other philanthropic partners here in LA to be able to provide rental support and also, food gift cards and the like, to really kind of provide people some level of stability as they're trying to figure it out. Lastly, I'll say, the mayor of Englewood likes to say all the time that Englewood is one of the most affordable places to live in the county. And this is true. But the thing is, if you get displaced from a city like Englewood, then where are you going to go? Right. And so we can see very clearly folks moving from the place of security to not trying to find out what the next move is going to be. And it's kind of disheartening, man. And so we're doing our part. And it's not just us, it's not just fellow renters, it's also fellow owners who have had people in their community for quite some time. Like, we're talking about people who have rented for generations who exist in these places, and who have been neighbors to folks who own homes in Englewood too. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a larger problem that we can talk more and more about, but like, it's all about us galvanizing together to really solve this problem. We're not going to be able to do it as organizations on our own. It's going to take all of us to really solve this problem together.
That's right, Derek. So we got your back. But tell us a little bit more, and then we'll go to Pam. Like, what is it like in Englewood? I mean, you mentioned a stadium. I know there's also, Silicon Beach, which is right there. So what is that doing to the rents? What is that doing? You mentioned displacement. How do you see rents increasing? What type of displacement is happening? Do you, when you're talking to Uplift Englewood members, what are the types of things that they're facing? Paint us a picture.
Well, the reason why Uplift Englewood came together in the first place is because everybody was across the city was seeing rent increases, and community members wanted to come together to do something about it. And when I'm saying rent increases, I'm not talking about $100 here or there. I'm talking about thousands of dollars, right? I think the biggest one that actually moved the mayor to do something about it was a rent increase from $1,200 up to $2,500, right? Which is like, how and why? And and he told us initially that it was hyperbole, that what we were bringing to the table was not actually what was happening across the board. But when he did the survey, he saw that we're looking at folks dealing with 50 and 60 and 70, 100, 125% increases on their rent, right? And so that was years of telling the stories and bringing folks to city council. And I can tell countless of stories of folks who helped to be a part of that mission, but didn't make it to see the other side of being able to stay in the city, right? But like, this work, it's happening, and we don't want to just blame it on the stadiums and stuff like that. But that speculation has caused more interest in the area, and I'm not putting it on the mom and pop owners, which is why I was saying earlier, it's not just the renters who help make this case. Our fellow community members, all of us, owners and renters alike, who want to see Englewood stay the same as we build this new Englewood, that they talk about all the time. But there's outside interests that are coming in and buying up wide swaths of our community, right? And so, again, this is for us to really solve this problem, we're going to have to actually come with more thoughtful and progressive ideas about what does community land ownership look like, and how we make sure that there's place and space for people who have been in our communities for quite some time. What are the ways that we can make sure we stand in the chasm with them and make sure that they have right to counsel, and making sure they have the ability to pay for the things that they owe, because they are folks who have been working throughout the entire pandemic. Like these folks in these stories, man, they're insurmountable, and we're talking to folks every single day. But I know and I believe, and maybe it's because I'm an optimist, that we can get to the other side of the decision.
Definitely. We'd love to come back to you and hear at least one of those stories. But let's hear from you, Pamela, in the East Side. What are you seeing in terms of some of the trends, in the last week or so? What are some of the issues that have hit your radar and some of the rapid response that you've had to jump into?
Thank you, Jenny. And I just want to reaffirm what Derek shared, that the issues today are coming from even before the pandemic. made worse because of the pandemic. So Eastside Leads, we are a coalition of different organizations that include youth serving organizations like Legacy LA and Inner City Struggle, affordable housing developers like ELAC, East LA Community Corporation, Public Council. So we are a diverse coalition within our organizational partners. And with that, with our community members, we have parents and we have youth in our coalition. And I just wanted to say that what I'm seeing on the ground is from the youth and parent perspective. For example, the increasing in rent. You know, we fought alongside Liberty Hill. We fought alongside the unincorporated Tenants United back in 2017, 18, 19, right? We passed a permanent rent stabilization ordinance. In April, it became effective. And all of a sudden, we are hit with this pandemic. People had to shelter in place. And so at the time, that confusion started, right? Hey, Pam, there's this permanent rent stabilization ordinance that just went into effect. This is what I was hearing from renters, from our members. But how is what the governor just shared, this stay-at-home order, what is LA County doing? I hear the mayor is also doing it. All of a sudden, April comes around, April 1st, a year ago. Actually, a year ago, we were holding a Know Your Rights workshop about that new permanent rent stabilization ordinance with unincorporated Tenant United partners. That's where the confusion really started for our members, because it no longer became, what are these protections that we have permanently, but what are the protections that we have under the pandemic? And that's all of a sudden what we had to start doing in coalition, learning about these different layers of government and the protections that they were giving us, while at the same time reminding renters that those protections weren't necessarily covering them fully. There were permanent protections. And so as organizers, we were learning right alongside the attorneys, right? What are the changes? It honestly felt that we were always spinning the wheel as little hamsters, because every other month, our local jurisdictions were changing laws. In the county scenario, the county always improving on the tenant protections that we had during COVID-19. So I share that. And then the other trend, Jenny, and to everybody watching, and I'm looking here, is not just this confusion, right, on Know Your Rights, but also the harassment. All of a sudden, right, our members were being empowered to continuing to be empowered to assert their voices, to tell their property owners, wait a minute, you can't give me a rent increase during this pandemic, either because I'm a City of LA resident or I'm an unincorporated LA County resident. But as soon as they did that, that's where the harassment would kick in. That's where the constant door knocking, even on a weekend, of the landlord coming to claim their check, right? And that's harassment that has continued. Whenever a tenant wants to exercise the right under the interim protections, some sort of harassment follows, whether that's through texting, through calling, through dropping in unannounced, through all of a sudden, you know, we need to make a habitability inspection. So privacy, also on the ground, we heard a lot of privacy violations, right? Landlords coming unannounced for an inspection, coming unannounced and not following PPE, right? And so the tenant feeling unsafe. And all of this harassment leads to a pressure that led to mental health issues, both from the parent and both from the youth side. The parent, whether they were a street vendor, undocumented, right, because they are undocumented, they're vending on the streets, or they're doing different sort of jobs. Sometimes, of course, you know, they're on the front lines of different work. So they go and they put their lives at risk. They're stressed. They've carried that stress of being essential workers because they come home to a very likely, right, overcrowded condition. So the mental illness, the mental health, the stress, the anxiety is something that is felt and has been felt for over a year. And now I want to talk about the youth angle, Jenny. The youth are seeing this. The youth most likely, at least from our membership, you know, they have status, whether that's a residency or they're US citizens. They all of a sudden become head of household. Their mom and dad got COVID. They have to go out to work. I have youth that told me, you know, they're either juniors or seniors in high school, but they tell me, I need to find a job. I need to find a fast food job, a retail job. You know, with Eastside Leads, we've been able to provide work through outreach and education, thanks to Stay Housed LA County, to some of our members, to some of our youth. But the reality is, I'm worried. I'm worried about these trends that if we don't find, you know, if our elected officials don't listen to us on the ground, you know, this mental health condition, the fact that, like Derek mentioned, families are being displaced from their communities, we're going to feel that. We're already feeling that. I'll pause there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we are, you know, moving quickly through the rest of the panel here. I wanted to give everybody one more chance before we open it up for discussion with the audience to share one story that really crystallizes the experience of tenants on the ground in your community. Kata, do you want to start us off?
Sure. First, I just want to underline folks on our panel today is, yes, I've gotten on the phones and had folks answer from Englewood and have multiple people in their living room saying, I've got my neighbor here and I've got my uncle here, and some, and this is after they say, really, what is this? Think, yes, I'm so glad you called, and they go and get other folks. So yes, to what I'm hearing from Derek, I've heard that on the phones as well, and to Pamela as well. I've worked with youth and young adults who they're doing the paperwork for their parents or for the household of trying to, with declaration, did you call my mom back? Can you call her please? Or you just call me, and we're helping them through all those steps. So just +1. And the tenant story that I would like to tell is a recent one, is a tenant that called our team on March 11th during the early part of the day. Turns out that she was back rent from April 2020 to now. She might have paid, bits here and there, but pretty much the whole year. She had a basic understanding of what she should be doing, knew it was some type of declaration, wasn't doing it correctly. So we got her into a workshop, happened to be happening that same day. In the workshop, learned all of these details, not quite on the phone. So learned all these details. It was a year, some things in the situation as well, like Pamela was kind of gesturing to, that it's going to happen. You have more people in the household. You have other people taking on other jobs. So we learned more about her story, and through the workshop, we realized there's a lot of work to do with this tenant, with this family, declarations. Now we have rental assistance too. So I think what's really great about this story is this tenant then came to the Sage new member meeting, and I think that that's really amazing. Like, for a community-based organization, like, that is so exciting, because this person needs a lot of help, but they were also just so willing to come and learn more about other housing things and spend basically the whole day on addressing their situation. And we're going to be staying connected to this person, and because she's connected to Stay Housed, her and her family are going to be doing the right steps so that they don't get a UD tomorrow, so they don't get a lockout tomorrow. So that's just one of our recent stories, and there's plenty other, pre-March 2021.
Thank you, Kata. Yes, it's amazing when we're able to find someone in need, and then Sage, for example, in this case, was able to bring this individual into your membership and build power over time, because now she's not only helping herself, but helping her neighbors as well. Pam, do you want to share a tenant story as well?
So many, so many. Yet, because it's on the daily that we get calls, right? Like, Sage is doing it, Uplift Englewood is doing it, and like Jenny, you mentioned 20 other organizations, CDOs are doing it on the daily. But I want to share a story of Jasmine. And Jasmine, last year in September 16th, for those of you that are familiar with Mexican, that's Mexican Independence Day, a big deal in East LA. But that day, her family and her neighbors were displaced because of a big fire in unincorporated LA County, East LA. The fire destroyed the East LA Community Corporation affordable housing development, and the fire then went to the adjacent building, which is where Jasmine lived. No one lived in the ELAC building, but 14 families lived in Jasmine's building. That includes 22 adults and about 8 children. What does that mean? All of a sudden, they only had the clothes on their back, but Jasmine did something. She was connected to Inner City Struggle because she was working on a local campaign with them doing phone banking. So she's a youth. And then Inner City Struggle connected her to Eastside Leads because of our work in outreach and education about Know Your Rights. So we jumped on board. What we realized is there's a lot in this particular scenario. What Jasmine told me when she called me, though, 3 days after the fire, was, hey, my family just lost everything. My mom's a street vendor. My dad got laid off, but my family's not the only one impacted. My entire community of neighbors are impacted. What can we do? Can you help us? With public counsel, Jenny, we've been able to support the tenants by representing them. However, it is not as easy cut. Now it's April 2021. The fire happened in September. Only 2 of the 14 families have found permanent housing. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And we've been connected to every agency, right? But there's also been success. The tenants were able to exercise their rights. They've been able to receive their deposit, first month's rent. We are fighting for relocation. And the right to a relocation came thanks to Unincorporated Tenants United winning that permanent rent control ordinance. But in Jasmine's story, right, you lose everything. They didn't have savings because their landlord refused to accept a notice of declaration of COVID-19, right? March, April, May, June, July, August, September. That's all the months that her family and neighbors, the majority of which were COVID-19 impacted, could have exercised that right. When they did, their landlord showed up every weekend demanding the rent. That is unacceptable. Imagine if they had been able to save whatever earnings they had. They wouldn't have struggled so much to just find a safe place to shelter after the fire. Today, Jasmine is an outreach and education lead with Eastside Leads under Stay Housed LA County. And she can be on the phone and relate to the hundreds of tenants that we service in a way that I, as an organizer, can't. So that is just a success. We are, like Kata said, we are connecting with countywide. So that's her story. We're still fighting it, but I know that as a collective, we can find permanent housing for the families.
Indeed. Yes. What I love about Jasmine's story is not only the connection to Stay Housed LA, but the deep connection to Inner City Struggle and Eastside Leads. And it's through that type of community building that there is true power, right? You can potentially win or lose any given month with a landlord battle or with a situation around permanent housing, but that's long-term community that helps find resilience as well as the long-term solution. So thank you, Pam, for that. And Derek, do you want to wrap us up with a brief story of a tenant from Englewood?
You got it. And I'll do my best to be brief. In Englewood, I live in Englewood, right? And have worked with folks from the surrounding area as well. And, my daughters, their friends are being displaced from the classrooms, right? When they're asking me, well, yeah, they were having problems paying rent. That's what we do, right, Dad? Like, yeah, but sometimes the story is not always good. And the story I wanted to share was with a friend of mine, Kish, who was reluctant from the very beginning of coming to one of our community meetings for Uplift Englewood and sharing her story. But she was going through so much that she didn't have anywhere else to turn. She didn't know what else to do. And so she came to the meeting and she shared and told us it was one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard of how someone was taken advantage of, right? And so we wanted to link her up with the right services, and thankful for LaughLift for being a partner in the work that we're doing here in Englewood, so that she could figure out the steps to take. But because of the impact of her story, like, Kish, we need you to be a part of this movement, right? And to help tell your story. And she didn't want to do that, right? But she took a moment to think about it, especially after talking to Jonathan from LAFLA and getting the support she had. And this is kind of one of the tenets of SJLI. We believe that when you can help someone get out of a survival mode in their life, they become into a thriving space. And it's when those people are in a thriving space that they have the capacity to help other people, right? And so she came back and was like, I want to share my story. And it happened to be one of the times we were going to the city council meeting. And she told her story at that point in time. And it helped to make the case that much louder. And it was at that point she decided, you know what, not only am I going to do that, but we need to actually organize some protests on the side of the street so people can know what's going on here. She galvanized some of her people who lived in her building to tell their story, and so we could share it on social media. And so she became one of the strongest supporters we had in the movement. And then the new landlord that took over was one of those corporate landlords, which is a different conversation for a different day. I'll save it. But she ended back into another situation that we helped to try to get her out of. But unfortunately, the ending of that story, even though I would want it to be a positive one because of all the work she did, she ended up having to leave because it just became insurmountable, right? And that's what I mean about the chasm, because it's there. And you want to be able to hold on as much as you can to provide people the resources and the information that they can to be empowered. But the system sometimes is set up in a way where it just does not provide the resources and the need or to answer the call to the need, right? And so that's why we're here, man. You know, because we are going to do our part to stand in the space with folks and to give them the information they need so they can be transformative in what they're trying to do. But we're also taking the time to come together to come up with transformative ideas of how we can make sure that housing is a human right, which sounded kind of out there when we used to say it before the pandemic. But now after the pandemic, and you're seeing how so many people are being displaced, so many people are trying to find a way, that you begin to think, you know what, maybe that's not so obscure anymore. Like, housing is a human right. And we need to find ways to make sure that those who have been in our communities for so long have that right extended to them. So I really appreciate the space to be able to share these stories.
Thank you, Derek. So I'd love to pull up our closing slide, which is of course a call to action to give folks an opportunity to get involved in this work. So we have 2 calls to action today. The first, of course, because we are Liberty Hill and we are all donor activists, is to donate. So we've put the link here in the chat. You can click and give directly to Stay Housed LA, this network of powerful organizers and legal service providers who's dedicated to keeping people in their homes, preventing homelessness, and ultimately ending homelessness by keeping people safe in the homes that they currently reside, keeping communities together. So you can click on that link, donate to Stay Housed LA County at the link in the chat. The second thing you can do is to advocate. There is an active bill in Sacramento. The bill number is AB 1487. This will ensure that we have a Stay Housed California. Not only will we be funding outreach, education, and legal services in Los Angeles, but across the state to have a dedicated source of funding. It's one more step towards a codified right to counsel for all tenants in need, all tenants who may be facing harassment or eviction on the ground. So that link is also in the chat, and I'll ask Ray to go ahead and pull it up so that people have a clear view of what to do. You just quickly put your name, address, your assembly member will auto-populate, and you can click send, a quick email to help pass this new tenant protections bill and expand Stay Housed LA to Stay Housed California. So we look forward to seeing donations as well as action alerts going out. You're more than welcome to share that online with your friends via social media as well, as soon as you complete the form yourself. I want to say a very special thank you to all of our guests and panelists today. Pamela, Kata, and Derek, you all inspire me every single day, and we thank you so much for your work on the ground. Of course, thank you to our community of donors and donor activists. We are so appreciative to be in this community with you, and we look forward to continuing the fight for justice together. Have a great night, everybody.